BC teachers and education leaders are opposed to the use of rankings based on standardized test results to measure student performance. The Minister of Education says it's impossible to plan a strategy for success without data, but also acknowledges the foundation skills assessment is not the only relevant information. So what are the alternatives? Parents want accountability. Teachers want a more accurate depiction of success, both for themselves and their students. It seems simple enough, but now it's become a political issue. Or is it a matter of the tests and how the test results are used? How does the quality of teaching and learning come under market principles? In today's episode, we're talking about the real issues around the FSA. I'm Paul Shaker, and this is An Education Matter. On the program today are Bruce Bairstow, Superintendent of the Richmond School District, and Glenn Hansman, President of the Vancouver Elementary School Teachers Association. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We said in the opening that parents want accountability. Many other people want accountability also for all their governmental institutions. And teachers want an accurate depiction of the success they're trying to achieve in their classrooms with their students. All that seems simple enough, but it's become quite a complicated political issue. Could you reflect with me a little bit on why what seems to be a reasonable need on the part of society has become so much involved in partisan politics?
Well, I think the heart of the matter is this is a very complex question. It's like, what constitutes good parenting? What constitutes good teaching and learning? And when you try to reduce it to a simple or simplistic answer, it becomes distorted. That's the heart of the issue. I think it became political with the decision to move from a random sampled measurement, which would tell you how the system was doing, to a census measurement on a student-by-student basis. And then, of course, when the Fraser Institute abused that data to create its rankings, and then the Sun decided to give them high publicity, now it's political.
I see. So the status quo going back was a random sample method, which for our audience means that students are not all evaluated by the tests, but a representative sample are, which leads to the same sort of scientific validity. Glenn, what do you think about the situation we find ourselves in? How did we get here?
Well, I agree with what was just said. I mean, if the intention is to look towards systems change or how well the overall system is doing, then a sample-based assessment could be useful for that, in combination with lots of other data and information that we collect from schools and everything. But once you get a per student census-based instrument and then it's given more weight than it deserves by attaching rankings to it, it creates a heightened state of anxiety and scrutiny based upon something very narrow and inadequate for making what is a very complicated decision and a very complicated culture and network. And I think that flies in the face of what parents ultimately want for their kids. They want to be able to take their child to a neighborhood school and know that it's a safe, caring place for learning. And the FSA isn't really going to tell you that.
So is the objection then to the FSA itself or to the way that it's used to rank schools? Bruce?
Well, I think there's a little bit of both. I mean, there is an argument that the FSA doesn't give you bang for the buck, but I don't think that's the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue is the misuse of data to create misinterpretations and misinformations. And I believe that's how it's become political, and in my opinion, that's what needs to be corrected.
Glenn, have you seen any evidence of test prep going on in the schools in order to try to prime the pump for strong test performance, or of narrowing of the curriculum, where a disproportionate amount of time is spent on testable subjects?
Absolutely, and I think that's only going to become more prevalent as the FSA has been moved earlier in the year now, and so people are trying to play catch-up, force things into the shape of their year where it might not normally have occurred. You know, for example, there's going to be a question on fractions yet, but that, given the group of students that you might have, that might not be the place you want to be at. But there is a lot of pressure to practice the FSA, and I don't mean just giving grade 4 students the opportunity to practice filling out bubbles on a multiple choice question, but deliberately narrowing things down and focus on items that are going to be specific on the FSA at the expense of the broad curriculum that we do have. And some schools have been quite overt and sort of proud of the fact that they are practicing. Recent articles in the Vancouver Sun, principals excited about the fact that they've been practicing and their marks have gone up. Well, that's sort of how accurate is the information if that's the case.
To many people, it seems manifestly obvious that tests that deal with cognitive subject matter are a legitimate, a valid way to look at school performance. I went to hear recently an economist from the C.D. Howe Institute, and he regarded it as just an automatic presumption that scores on tests like this would be valid for evaluating a school. And yet every stakeholder group in the province, every professional educator stakeholder group, including the school trustees, and the last 3 ministers of education have all said that the rankings are inappropriate. Why is there this great divide between people in the profession of education with regard to school rankings, and so many people, even educated people, outside the profession of education? Bruce, do you have any idea?
Well, that's an interesting question. If I might, I'm going to go back a bit because I want to disagree a little bit with Glenn. There is pressure to practice, but I haven't observed that. I think teachers resist that strenuously. The example that he noted was a private school that was quite proud of the fact it moved way up the rankings a couple of years ago. But I'd have to say on behalf of my teachers that they actively resist that. Now, why do these simplistic measures that don't gather the data become popular? I'm not really sure. Many times with parents, I've done a brainstorming exercise and said, what is it you want your children to come out of the school system with? What's the most important residual effect that in 5 years you want to look back and know about? Always this is focused on issues of character and honesty and diligence and curiosity and confidence and skills and attitudes. Of course people need to have cognitive information. They need to know the history of their country and how to do their times tables. And this can be done and is in fact the easy part of education. But the enduring part that people really value is more subtle. So why we must measure certain things and report them, I don't know. Perhaps, and unfortunately, it's because that's what's measurable.
If you give a kid a hammer, then everything's a nail. I did get that feeling from the economist because this is really the only data he had that was somewhat objective, and so he was determined to use it for all it was worth and maybe more than it was worth. We've been running into some resistance on the part of the public as well as others, including the Teachers Federation, with respect to cooperating with the FSAs. We've seen parents withholding their children from taking the FSAs, and there's talk, and there's even been a motion in the BCTF for teachers to organize in their resistance to the FSAs. What do you think about these activities on the part of parents, teachers, and others to fly in the face of government policy and resist the implementation of the FSA? Glenn?
Well, I think it's positive. Parents should be making informed choices about those sorts of things, and I don't think it is going to interfere with the good work that is being done in schools. School communities do work together to try to improve, to reflect upon what's going on in their schools, to make things better, to learn from one another, and for the sake of children and their learning. And we're already collecting much richer data that we could use for that purpose. It's very interesting to look at, say, the district plan of the Vancouver School Board, which has 5 pages of all the various things that we do, instruments that we use and activities that we use, qualitative and quantitative ways of demonstrating growth, improvement, success, and areas that need improvement. And the FSA is marginalized even in a document like that. So bowing out of the FSA isn't going to interfere with the positive things that we should be doing and will continue to be doing, because those things are going on.
Bruce, as a superintendent of schools, you're in the middle of some of this. I know because there's pressure on principals to get everybody in to be tested. How do you relate to these acts of resistance?
Well, I understand the resistance, but in all honesty, I think it's poorly conceived and misguided. And unfortunately, I think the net effect is to bring into question the competence of the people involved and the character of the institution, because it looks like it's catfighting. There are very reasoned arguments and very reasoned discussions that go on. In my school district, we have absolutely no difficulty speaking to individual teachers and our association about this in very professional and adult ways. But the public face of this, which comes out in papers, is not as reasoned, and I think it's not contributing to a solution to this issue, which I think could quite easily be resolved, except for the pressure to produce the rankings that get produced in a newspaper and so on. The educational elements of this, I think, could be easily resolved.
Well, what are some of the steps that we could take, that we as citizens should be advocating for, to put us on that course of action to resolve these issues in a constructive way and allow our schools to perform at the highest level?
Well, I think there's two different audiences here. One is the public who have children in school, and one is the public who don't have children in school. Those who have children in school have access to rich information about their children's progress, and in my experience, they discount the simplistic ratings heavily because they have much better data. And if there's a difference between the ranking and their experience, they go with their experience. Those who have no other access to information clutch at that, sometimes out of a belief that that there should be accountability with a capital A and that this will somehow provide it. With that audience, I think it's much more difficult, because to take the complex matter of nurturing a child, raising a child, educating a child, and reduce it to a number so that you can do the ever-popular report card on universities or hospitals or schools is simply not possible and will always ultimately be misleading.
I wanted us to talk a little bit about the accountability movement. It's in the news quite a bit. We saw the C.D. Howe Institute recently come to Vancouver promoting their version of school rankings. These take into account demographic factors. They started this initiative in Ontario, and recently they sponsored a workshop here in Vancouver. Does this Principals and Vice Principals Association have a position on the FSAs and school ranking?
We haven't taken a position as per se on FSAs and school rankings. We don't have a policy generating system as other organizations do. But I can say with some confidence that principals and vice principals in this province would not support the use of school rankings. And if I can go just a bit out on a limb, I'm not really sure what school rankings accomplish anyway. You don't know what the rankings mean. What's the difference between first and fifth, or for that matter, between first and 100th? If the difference is minuscule, you don't know. Rankings do nothing to show whether or not schools are improving or not improving. They show where you finished in the race. You don't know if the whole field has improved or not improved. Paul, the best way to figure out whether or not a school is doing its job is go visit. Go talk to the teachers in the school. Go talk to the principal. Find out what your child is learning. That's what's important, not whether or not you score 3rd or 8th or 9th or 5th. Visit the school and find out.
Do you think it's clear to people that the rankings are not an initiative of the Ministry of Education, that those are done by a private entity and republished in the media?
I certainly hope so. The ministry, the government, the minister herself has been very, very clear on that point. The only reason that the Fraser Institute and other bodies can do the rankings based on published data is because in the interest of transparency, that data is made public. It's not made public for that purpose, and has been widely denounced.
Yes, all stakeholder groups, professional ones, and the last 3 ministers of education have all spoken out against it. Sandy, now you face this right in the life of your school, because Burnaby is a district where there are declining enrollments, population is aging, and I'm sure that some people are using rankings as a method of determining where their child's going to go to school. How does the accountability movement and rankings in particular affect you in this way?
It's challenging because parents are more and more aware of what's happening at different schools. So it's challenging because they are shopping around and they're asking questions and they're investigating. So it's important that we're offering, you know, different programs to attract kids to what we have at our school, and spreading it out amongst the district.
And that visiting procedure, is that open to members of the community to come and visit your school?
Absolutely. We're just involved in a school review process, and parents are involved in that, and students are involved in that. And I just completed one last week at an elementary school, and it's a fabulous experience to go in and see what's happening at other schools, and so it just sort of connects you back to your own.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
I really like the idea of making decisions based on data. Data-driven decision-making is one of the better ways to go, because then you're actually looking at the best interest of the child, and you're figuring out, okay, what does the child know? What are they interested in doing? What does the school have to offer? And how can we build a system that's most successful for that child? I'm not as big a fan of the idea of ranking schools. Where I would say get more and more data, what rankings tend to do is they tend to narrow the data that we consider, primarily down to specific test scores. And then even then, the test scores are going to be generally focused on things like literacy and mathematics, and they leave out a whole bunch of what schools do. So while I'm really a fan of getting as much information as you can about the schools across a variety of subject matter domains, across a variety of activities and ways that the child might be engaged in the schools, I really don't think rankings add to the dialogue very much.
I understand that parents are sometimes selecting where they buy a house or moving their child from school to school based on rankings that they see in the newspaper. I gather you're saying that that's not what you would do with your children.
No, not at all. In fact, one of the things I think it's more important to do is pick a community. Look at the community. Drive into the community. If you're comfortable in the community, if it's a safe community, if it's a comfortable community for you to be in, then I would pretty much bet, as you said earlier, schools are a microcosm of their communities. Then you can begin to look for the schools and check out the schools. And make sure that you go into the school. Find out what the story actually is in the schools. These ideas of looking at the test scores of the school tell you absolutely nothing about what's going on in the schools. All it tells you is it gives you a number. If you want to find out and make an educated choice for your child, and in fact, actually, I should say, if you want to make an educated choice with your child, you should go into the schools together and see if that's a comfortable place for that child to learn.
Monica, I wonder in your position if you have parents coming into you and questioning the rankings and ratings of the schools in your district.
When parents are looking for schools, definitely they're looking at standardized data and accountability measures that the Fraser Institute supplies. But there's a lot of other factors and a lot of great things happening in BC schools. If your child's interested in music or wants to be a mechanic or would love to be on stage, those things aren't reflected in those reports. So you're not going to find those kind of issues reflected in that data. And reality is, when we look back at our high schools, we don't remember the academic measures that we did or the placements or the tests that we wrote. You remember the relationships that you built in high school, the activities you were a part of. And that's what's important for a child in a school. Kids don't go to school to learn every day. Kids go to school to be with their friends and have fun.
The stakeholder groups in the province the professional education stakeholder groups have all expressed a great deal of concern about ratings and rankings, including the last three ministers of education. In the face of that, however, we still see the rankings very prominently displayed in the newspaper and very much on people's minds as they're buying real estate. Can you help me understand why, although professional educators, the School Trustees Association, the principals, the superintendents, the teachers, and the ministry all oppose this method of evaluating schools, it seems to have a good deal of traction?
Well, I'll give you the easy question, the easy answer. I don't know how palatable it is, but it's that people are lazy. We like to have a number. It doesn't involve a whole lot of work. All we need to do is get a number, set a ranking up, and we've got all the answers right there for us. We don't want to go through the hard work of actually going to the school, talking to the teachers, talking to the students in that school, looking at the displays of work, looking at student work, talking to the principal or the parents, and getting kind of a broader sense of, is good education happening in this school? Are these kids intellectually, physically, socially, and mentally healthy? Is it a happy place to be? Is it a constructive place to be? It's much easier to say, okay, we're going to look at a test score, plop a number on it, and then pretend like that actually tells us something.
There's a good deal of concern about lessening diversity also as a result of ranking schools. Obviously, children from different social classes, there's a correlation with how they perform. Children who start their education with a language deficit have a certain burden to bear at coming up to meeting high standards. So one solution for driving test scores up at a school is to lessen the diversity and focus on the kind of children that come from backgrounds that seem to dispose high test scores. What's lost when a school is focused this way, when the parents of children who are high test achievers due to factors external to the school mobilize to cluster their children in just a few schools?
Yeah, again, there's all kinds of negative consequences that happen when the pressures on the system and the pressures from the tests become too great. So that you'll get some students being excluded from the tests, you'll get other students who may be right on the bubble of reaching the cut scores, getting more resources, and the other schools at the ends, the other students at the end being left out. But on the other hand, and I'm very hesitant to jump on the completely critical bandwagon, because these tests do give people very valuable information if we can use them appropriately. If we can use them in an instructionally sensitive manner that actually helps change what happens in the classroom. No teacher that I know of would say, I don't want to know how my students are doing in my classroom. And no teacher that I know of would say, I don't want to adjust my instruction to better deliver the content to the students. However, when we take these what may be very powerful instructional tools and we misuse them for accountability purposes, we lose a great opportunity to make positive improvement.
What better ways could we use than rankings and standardized test scores in order to determine whether the results of our school systems, our individual schools, and our system as a whole are what we want them to be?
Well, I think if you're looking at the system as a whole, there are many measures. We have international comparisons where, of course, BC performs in an exceptional way. We could easily do random sampled measures that would tell people how the curriculum is performing and students were learning in a broad sense. We could do deeper and more detailed investigations of how certain groups of students are performing, students with learning disabilities, students with English as a second language, Aboriginal students. All of these things, I think, would be rich information. What they wouldn't do is respond to those who feel they want a simple measure of which school is better than the next school, because they want to get in their car and drive to what's perceived to be the #1 school. It's a much deeper problem, and I think it originates in many cases with people who have, in their own experience, lived in jurisdictions where this is actually true, that schools vary significantly in quality, level of funding, and type of staffing. And to help the broad public understand that this is not true in British Columbia is, I think, a challenge.
Yes, something that Canadians may not realize is in the United States, the same individual student, depending on what district they're in, might be funded at $4 or $1, a ratio of 4 to 1, depending on which side of a political line they live on. Whereas the tradition in the Commonwealth and in Canada and in British Columbia is to fund every student, every regular student at the same level. Glenn, do you have some thoughts on how we could get at the issue of evaluation in a way that's compatible with the stakeholder groups?
I do. I think if we move towards a sample-based version of large-scale assessment, and then in doing so, if we were able to put some of our energies and our funding into more detailed, specific, more project-oriented forms of assessment where we could go deeper, say looking at science. My understanding is that 15, 20 years ago there were teams that came out from the ministry or from school districts and would sit down, for example, and observe students doing experiments, talking about their learning in science, having deep conversations with teachers about their practices in the classroom and how they sought to improve the experience for students. Those things happened and have fell by the wayside because we've drifted towards the blunt instrument. And I don't think large-scale assessments are going to go away, but perhaps there needs to be more of an education piece with the broader public as to how useful those are. The way things are at right now, they're not useful for comparing school to school. Elementary schools vary in size from less than 100 up to a few hundred, but that's not a big enough sample rate for it to be meaningful. If we wanted those numbers to be meaningful, all of our elementary schools would have to be 2,000 plus. Nobody wants that. It's a paradox between wanting to compare versus maintaining small schools, and so those conversations need to continue.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
Although all stakeholder groups and the past 3 ministers of education oppose using FSA scores for ranking schools, the Fraser Institute and media outlets continue to push this unscientific agenda. Is it any surprise that increasingly parents and teachers are looking for ways to stop being the object of a type of misinformation? One of the costs of this nullification movement is the appropriate use of our achievement testing in our schools, as well as the nurturance of a collaborative relationship among the education stakeholders who provide schools for our children. Let's hope we can work through these acts of resistance and reestablish a cooperative, respectful social contract among government, families, and educators. Thanks for tuning in to Your Education Matters.
For more information about this show or to view past episodes, go to the Your Education Matters website at www.youreducationmatters.ca. The views and opinions presented in this program are not necessarily those of all faculties, staff, or administration at SFU.